Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have my final June as well as Whateverathon wrap up for you. I did not quite reach my goal of reading one book per prompt. However, if you follow me on Twitter, you will have seen that I did manage to finish one bingo board and start a second one. I did also finish all 10 priority books that I had set myself, and I finished a total of 16 books. Because I had already read quite a few books by the time June was halfway over, I did do a mid-month check-in. In that video, I talked about these books right here, which were Gallant by V.E. Schwab, The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah, The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa, Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, In the Labyrinth of Drakes by Marie Brennan, and Siren Queen by Niveau, as well as Evershore by Brandon Sanderson. So if you're interested in learning more about my thoughts on these books, I will leave my mid-month check-in, my recent reads, linked down below and up there, so go and check that out after you watched this video. But now we still have to get through 9 books, so let me get into this wrap-up. So first, I finally finished my second non-fiction of the year, which was Necropolitics by Akil Mbembe, who is an author from, or a philosopher, a thinker from Cameroon, if I remember correctly, who also taught a lot or still teaches a lot at different African universities. And this is one of his essay collections, one of his most recent essay collections, I believe. This one came out in 2019, and it's a lot about politics, race, war, the current situation, and also necropolitics, which is kind of a term that Akil Mbembe, I don't remember if he coined it himself, but he's definitely the author that comes up first when you type in necropolitics into Google. And I also just quickly pulled up an article where it just very quickly and concisely says what necropolitics is according to Akil Mbembe, because I didn't want to spend, 10 minutes trying to describe it for you when I can do it so much more quickly. But anyway, philosopher Akil Mbembe describes necropolitics as the capacity to define who matters and who does not, who is disposable and who is not. In other words, necropolitics is a framework that illuminates how governments assign differential value to human life. The closer you are to dominant power, the more your life is worth. And so that's basically the concept that Akil Mbembe takes apart within this essay collection. He talks a lot about how liberal democracies were usually built on the backs of the oppressed and on the backs of people who were othered, in the case of the US, enslaved people and so on. And yeah, he also connects his thoughts a lot to Frantz Fanon, he connects his thoughts to Foucault, so, a lot of other thinkers that came before, also decolonial thinkers that came before. And I overall thought this book was very, very interesting. It gave me a lot to think about. You can also see I tabbed it a lot, but it also sometimes made me feel like this book might have been slightly, above my pay grade as a metaphor, because Akil Mbembe works with a lot of very, very complex concepts. So even though I found this book very interesting and it helped me a lot for, my writing and the way I think about things, I'm not exactly sure if this would be a book that I would recommend you if you have never, read texts on decolonial thinking and so on. So yeah, maybe don't make this book the one you start with, is what I'm saying. So next I have 2 rereads. First I have my reread of Magic by Robin Hobb, which is the second book in the Lifeship Traders trilogy, which is the second series within Robin Hobb's Realms of the Elderlings. This series, as opposed to the Farseer trilogy, is multiple POV, and it is set around this place called Bingtown, mostly, where they have life ships, which are basically ships that are alive, where like the figurehead at the front of the ship comes alive. And so we mostly center one family and their life ship, and then we also center Kenneth, who is a pirate and who wants to become king of the pirates. And yeah, I didn't like the second book too much on reread, to be honest. To be honest, most of the characters just legitimately suck. I mean, one of the characters gets a lot better in the second book, a few others do as well, but the reason why I just really didn't like it is because all of the relationships, the romantic relationships, are just legitimately awful. And I feel like they're not supposed to be portrayed as awful, or you're not supposed to think that most of them are just like really predatory and awful, but they are. And yeah, I just did not enjoy this as much as I thought I would on reread, because I did enjoy my reread of the first book, but yeah, this one just for me wasn't it for some reason. Then the second reread I had in June that I enjoyed way more was Kushiel's Avatar by Jacqueline Carey. This is the third and final book in Phaedra's trilogy, which is the first trilogy within the Kushiel's Dart universe. And yeah, I just really enjoyed my reread of this. I really enjoy Phaedra as a character. I think she's just a very impressive character. I like how Jacqueline Carey deals with sexuality within her books. I will also have a full trilogy series review up. Probably not that soon because I currently have like 5 reviews I still need to film and upload. But you know, it's coming within the next few months. I had one problem, however, with this one, which was the same problem that I had, well, actually I had 2 problems with this one, but you know, I had one slightly lesser problem and one slightly bigger problem. The slightly lesser problem was one that I also had with the first book, in that both the first and the third book feel like they're kind of 2 story arcs. And it kind of felt like, especially the second half of this book, you could have added a lot of stuff still to it without it being too much and just make another book out of it. So yeah, it just felt like there was a climax and a finale in the middle of the book, and then the story started back up, which was slightly weird. And then the other problem that I have is that this is the book out of the trilogy where you have the most instances of Orientalism, because Phaedra travels to places that are, you know, inspired by Egypt, inspired by ancient Persia, and so on. And so there are some things where I'm like, yeah, on reread they're not necessarily the best. Now on to the books that I have read for the first time in June, and as always I'm starting with the books that I enjoyed the least and ending with the books I enjoyed the most. First, I have Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second novella within the Stormlight Archive series, and it's the novella that comes after Oathbringer. However, I did not read it before I read Rhythm of War, and I did not really see that much of an issue with it, because back then it was only out as an ebook, and I don't really like reading ebooks. Yeah, so, what did I think about it? I think I gave it like 2.5 stars, because to be honest, wasn't all that interested in the characters. I think Lopen is one of the most annoying characters in the Stormlight Archive series. He's just, I really can't stand him, and he was one of the main characters that we follow within this series. Then I'm also starting to get really annoyed with how Brandon Sanderson started to do world building, because I feel, especially within the Cosmere, he stopped doing the world building in his books. He just starts throwing in terms and then explains what they are on like Reddit and in interviews, and so you can go to Word of Brandon or whatever and read up on what they're supposed to be, but he doesn't really explain what those things are within the actual text of his books. And that was one big thing that happened here with what Dawn Shards are. Haven't got a fucking clue. I know I'm not someone who reads the most closely, but I then talked in a group chat to friends about it, and we went to, you know, the Brandon Sanderson wiki, which is Copper something, Coppermind? I don't know, one of his wikis, and like all the citations within the text of the article of what Dawn Shards are, 90% of the citations were from Words of Brandon, you know, interviews and stuff, instead of from the books explaining what it is, which, I'm sorry, I can't be the only one who thinks that's fucking stupid, because I'm not gonna go and listen to all your interviews. Not everyone is gonna be an obsessive fan. Anyway, that little rant out of the way, aside from that, it's just one of those things, once again, where this, as I said, this isn't really important to understand Rhythm of War. However, this is fairly important in terms of the Cosmere, and if you want to understand the Cosmere. And I have explained that with Evershore already, that I just have an issue when you put important stuff into novellas, because novellas for me are the little additional tidbits that don't have space in your books. And novellas miss the point of novellas when you have to read them in order to understand everything going on. So yeah, and I'm pretty sure that these novellas are gonna be fairly important in the future, so yeah. Anyway, not the biggest fan. Then next I have Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and with this one I think sadly I'm gonna have to decide soon whether or not Silvia Moreno Garcia is an author for me, because this was once again, you know, a solid 3-star type book, and it seems more and more like Gods of Jade and Shadow was kind of, you know, an outlier in terms of how much I loved her writing in that one. Because yeah, this one, I found the lore really interesting in this one. I found the atmosphere and the world building very interesting in this one. By the way, Certain Dark Things is a neo-noir set in Mexico City, and there's vampires in this world. And we follow Domingo, who is a homeless kid who one day meets a vampire who is on the run from other vampires, and he decides to help her. So as I said, I really enjoyed the atmosphere and the vibes. I really enjoyed the lore behind vampires, because there's quite a few different types of vampires within this book. I mean, I found it very interesting because you have like this glossary in the back where you have so many different vampires from so many different places all over the world. But within the story we only actually get to see 3 types of vampires. So yeah, I'm not really sure what the point of that was. But the reason why overall I gave it only 3 stars is because I just couldn't really connect to the characters. I just found them kind of dull, and it didn't feel like we really got to know them. And like we spent enough time with them, and even the villains, it was just like, you know, they were kind of stereotypical and kind of very one-dimensional. And also in terms of world building, there were so many things where I'm like, okay, I actually want to know the backstory way more than the actual story happening right now. So yeah, overall, sadly, this was only 3 stars. Next, I have a book that sadly also was a bit of a disappointment for me, and that was Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, which was one of my most anticipated sequels that came out this year. This is the sequel to Black Sun and the second book in the Between Earth and Sky series, which is an adult high fantasy inspired by pre-Columbian indigenous cultures. And within the first one, the central plot is kind of this big prophecy. You have this character who is kind of supposed to be the vessel of this big crow god who is supposed to return to the city, save his people, and, you know, bring down the corrupt government. And then you also have a sun priest within the corrupt government who tries her best to, you know, do what's best for the people of the city, and who genuinely cares. And so this was the sequel, and I had high expectations, maybe too high of expectations, because mostly what saved this book for me is that I already really loved the characters, and I found the characters very, very interesting still. I found their motivations very interesting still. Although I have to be honest, I found the politics of the different people and the decisions they made and where we were supposed to go from the ending of the first book a little bit confusing and a little bit messy, and it just felt like it wasn't properly thought through. Like where we're supposed to go in the future. And yeah, that just kind of made me a little bit sad. Also the world building with, you know, the history and so on. I thought the way that it was presented was a little bit messy and a little bit confusing, because it wasn't really clear what exactly happened and so on. At least to me it wasn't. And so basically what I'm saying, the thing that really saved this for me were the characters, but also maybe the characters were part of the reason why I didn't enjoy this so much, because one of the dynamics that I enjoyed the most within the first book wasn't in the second book anymore, because the two separated at the end of the first book. So that was a little bit sad. And yeah, there were just a lot of elements where I was like, I feel like this should have been thought through better. Like, there was still so much potential in this book, and I'm still so excited to see where the series goes in future. But also, I don't know, this felt like it needed a few times working over it again. And it kind of felt like a third draft or something, or maybe like the first book was written and finished without really thinking about where the series would go in the future. I don't know, it just, there were a lot of things that kind of disappointed me, but overall I still gave it like 3.5 stars because I really love the characters. Then next I have Angel of Storms by Trudy Canavan, which is the second book in the Millennium's Rule series, the first being Thieves' Magic. And this was the series that I picked from my series TBR chart for June, and I really enjoyed this. Like, to be honest, this is not the type of series where I'm like, this has all-time favorite series potential, but this is the type of series that's just like a solid 3.5 to 4 star series, where the characters are really solid, where the world building is really solid, where the plot is really solid. There's nothing outstanding about it, but it's also just a really fun series. And the thing that I find quite interesting about the series is that the first two books both kind of feel like a setup. Like, the first book felt like a setup of the characters. We got to know our two main characters whose POVs we follow throughout the series. And then this book felt like the plot setup, like, you know, we're now setting up where the series is going in the future. And I just thought that was a really interesting choice, because the series is a quartet, so there's 4 books. And yeah, also the thing that I really enjoyed is that even though I remembered basically nothing from the first book, which I read last year, I still had no issues jumping back into the series. And yeah, I remembered more from one of the characters than the other, but overall I just, you know, it was a neat series and I really enjoyed it. Then next I have another book where I'm slightly disappointed by it, even though I shouldn't be, and the only reason why I'm slightly disappointed is because the 2 books before this book in the series I absolutely adored and loved. And that is Within the Sanctuary of Wings by Marie Brennan, which is the 5th and last book in the Memoirs by Lady Trent series, although there is a standalone sequel that I still have to pick up. Now overall I still give this a solid 4 stars. However, you know, the 4th book was a 5-star for me, and the 3rd book was also like a 4.5, really close to a 5-star book, and I really loved those. This one I didn't enjoy quite as much. What is this about though? I just realized I forgot to tell you what Millennium's Rule is about, but that's one of those series that's just basically impossible to describe anyway, so you know, whatever. In this series we follow Isabella Cumhurst, whose biggest dream at the beginning of the series it is to become a naturalist researching dragons. However, she lives in a society that is quite similar to Victorian times within our world, so you know, the options for women are quite limited. However, she doesn't let that stop her, and in every single book she basically goes on an excursion, on an expedition, researching dragons. I think one of the reasons why I might have not enjoyed this book quite as much is because the other books, especially the 2nd, the 3rd and the 4th book, focus quite a lot on Isabella going on these expeditions and then also getting to know the people there and getting to know the cultures and getting entrenched in these different cultures. However, there wasn't that much of that in this book. This one focused mostly on, you know, the research aspect of her story. And so I think just overall, I was like, yeah, I really enjoyed it, but you know, the thing that I loved the most about the other books wasn't in this as much. However, this is another one where sometime in the next few months you will get a full series review. And then the last book for this wrap up, I have another 5-star. I had a total of 3 5-stars in June, which makes me really happy actually. And that is Homegoing by Ya Gyasi. This is a literary fiction standalone novel, and in this one we follow 2 sisters one who was enslaved and one who married, you know, a white man during the time of slavery in Western Africa, I think in Ghana, yeah, in Ghana. And so you follow the families of those two sisters through the generations. You basically have one chapter per family member and one chapter per generation. And yeah, it's just a very harrowing but also very interesting story. It's beautifully written. Like, Yak Yasi is a beautiful storyteller, and I really want to read. I think she only has a second book out right now, which is Transcendent Kingdom. I'm not sure if she has any other books out, but I definitely want to read Transcendent Kingdom now. However, with this one I do want to provide some content and trigger warnings. First of all, just anything you can connect to slavery, any trigger warnings from sexual assault and rape to, you know, physical abuse to racism. There's also some chapters where the N-word is used quite liberally, so be aware of that as well. But overall, I just thought this is a beautiful book, and I thought just like the last chapter was quite a lot the way I thought it would be, but I still thought it just like completed the circle perfectly, but not too perfectly. So there were still some things left open and some things that didn't happen, which actually, you know, made it way more satisfying the way the book ended than if those things had happened. So yeah, I just can highly recommend this one. And that was it for all the books I read in the second half of June. If you have any thoughts on any of the books I mentioned, leave those in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where we read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out. And I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!